There you go. It's all right.
Okay, I'll try to be authentic.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. This is Andrew's Strategies with the Red Pill Religion podcast. I apologize for the late start and the bit of disorganized stuff. I apparently am the eternal boomer when it comes to OBS. But today we're going to have a free discussion with Q&A from the chat, and I'm here with some of my friends both inside and outside the project. Go ahead and say hi to everyone, Dunstan.
Well, hi. It's great to be here. Looking forward to the discussion.
Awesome. We also have a friend from Twitter, writer John Buck.
Hi, everybody. I wouldn't be too worried about him being a minute late there, Andrew. It's all right. I think your audience will forgive you for it.
It's the German in me. I'm sorry. I require precision in these things, and that's the part of me that I hate. So, yeah. And another friend from Twitter in the apologist sphere, Susan. Go ahead and say hi to everyone, Susan.
Hi everyone. Hi John. Hi everyone.
Hi, Susan.
Hi.
So, this is sort of a free-form discussion, and we don't have any questions yet, but let's go ahead and sort of chat about what's been on everyone's mind recently. I guess the key thing that's been on my mind recently in the apologetics world is where do arguments fit with regards to cultivating the faith, and what are the sort of first steps? Because oftentimes, with the folks I interact with online, it seems like arguments are actually something that is more appropriate for someone who is at least at like the beginner level of the faith, and not necessarily someone who is totally naive to spiritual things and so on and so forth. What are
Yeah.
your guys' experiences and thoughts on that?
You want to go first, John or Susan?
Sure, I'll go first, but I don't know how much you guys are really going to like it. I've kind of the opinion that for these types of arguments and like debates back and forth, I find that they are almost uh, reinforcing for the beliefs that the people have just going into it. So there's kind of this, I think, some sort of like psychological test that was done to see whether people were able to change their opinions about something. And what they did was first had them write out an essay from like writing out an essay in favor of something that they already didn't like. So if they were a Democrat, kind of writing out an essay, say, in the promotion of the Second Amendment or something like that, and then they would test their like beliefs on that. And it was only after actually putting through the process of kind of putting it into your own words, this thing that you previously didn't agree with, but just through that kind of open process of trying to understand the other person's side, that actually were their minds more likely to be changed. And I think kind of the opposite is true when like you go into a debate with somebody and like they like their reputation now is on the line there for them retaining their positions. And when you're, I don't know, put up against somebody that's trying to debunk your arguments or anything like that, then it's kind of like the incentives are in the favor of not learning anything new. So I don't know. From my perspective, I think that apologetics, like especially on Twitter, are kind of fruitless. There might be like some outlier cases, but I don't know. From kind of my outsider's perspective, it seems like they are much more useful only for like cultivating your own audience, or I don't know, providing entertainment for yourself.
I actually mostly agree with you. The only difference I would have is that it's often of benefit to people in the audience watching the debate to more fully understand both positions or to convince them. And
That's right.
and
Yeah.
and the
Yeah.
yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, I was just going to say that sometimes having somebody that you're propping up as the opposition, just to point out that, okay, this is a common argument that they might have. Here's how you can respond to that. And like that's useful for cultivating your own audience to be more, I don't know, able to respond to these types of arguments out in the wild. So I can see the utility in that.
Yeah, exactly. And the other thing is, through argument, you actually get some of the details and subtleties revealed. Part of this is sort of, it's really hard to find a good a good opponent for these types of arguments. But this is actually how the theological and law traditions of both Judaism and Rome got cultivated, is through this rigorous argument back and forth and making sure to understand the other side before making their point, and so on and so forth. But in places on like Twitter or online or even sometimes these debates that you see for politicians, they're designed primarily for entertainment. And that's actually why I like this, and we might. I keep on saying we should do it on the channel, but I haven't gotten anyone lined up yet. Is to do a Thomistic or medieval style debate where each side has to articulate the other side's point in their own words to confirm they fully understand before engaging with it and refuting it.
Right. Just to add to that, sorry, Dunstan, but that's something I really appreciate from like especially writings like the Summa Theologica. How when Thomas is actually responding to the objections, he's not taking it from like the atheists or the people outside of his own faith. It's rather from the other church fathers that came before him. So it's not like there's this easy get out of jail free card of just ignoring what they're saying. He's actually like the arguments are actually coming from inside the same house that he's arguing with. So he has to actually take them into account and respond to them adequately rather than just kind of brushing it off. And I think that's something that's lost, especially in debates where you're arguing against somebody that you don't necessarily have to take into consideration.
Yeah, and I think, and tying this a little into politics, I think that's sort of one of the key things that is missing in the modern West, is these types of debates and elections are sort of this assumption of winner take all, and the winner gets to be a dictator or have majority rule, rather than taking into account your opponent's position and trying to solve the problem by threading the needle.
Yeah, absolutely. I think apologetics, it can really open a person's mind if they come at it with an open heart and an open mind. I often see just people I'm talking to, or maybe on Twitter or some other venue, people just have closed minds, or really have a lot of animosity towards God and towards religion. That's why I think it's useful to go back to philosophy and history and things that unite us. I've been very impressed with you, Andrew, and with Max, especially Max, for saying how he loves the atheists and how we should all come together. And I'm trying to take that into account too. We are all in the same boat, and I think building relationships is a great way to for a person to open up, and it really helps your character, also helps your own character, and build you there. As for debates, I certainly do hope we can have some more of these debates. Um, but I refuse to debate. Well, I'm only going to debate a few people, and hopefully we can get Graham Oppie on again. Um, and a medieval style debate with him would be very interesting. A great atheist. It's just showing that, in a sense, we're all a family, because I think we're all created in the image of God. And I like it that you and Max and others have been emphasizing that, and it's me too. I want to emphasize that also. So I think the personal relationship side really breaks down a lot of barriers.
Yeah, that's right, and that's the thing about religion and philosophy, at least the ancient sense of it is it's a lot about how you live your life and relational and how it's embodied, not just this sort of intellectual parlor game.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Do we have any, or Susan? Do you want to mention anything in this regard?
Uh, Talking about yeah, the Twitter world, I found I really uh, try to stay out of political stuff, but I find myself drawn in, and as you probably noticed, I had a recent Twitter battle with a fellow Christian over a political thing, and really I wasn't trying to change that person's mind, but for other people, it might have been following the back and forth, hoping to
Yeah,
bring up points that they would think of. I wasn't, even her husband couldn't change her mind. So I didn't expect that would be able to change her mind. But in the religious realm, I really appreciate the debates that are like on YouTube, on Modern Day Debates, and other channels, because I do learn a lot. I got into apologetics basically through the scientific aspect. I got into first. I was introduced to Reasons to Believe, Hugh Ross, and I have a very scientific bent, and so just fairly recently, in the last few years, got interested in the philosophical debates, and just learning just by hearing it over and over again, the different standard arguments, and learning to, if I was in a debate, how to hone your own thinking, and actually, I'm in the process of maybe putting a debate together. I'm not going to say with who, because I'm probably going to chicken out uh, on modern day debate. Uh, but it's a political issue, but involving Christianity. But yeah, you have to have a thick skin. Uh,
hmm
I realize if I do that, I'm going to be the brunt of a lot of vicious attacks, and I guess you have to be willing to accept that.
yeah,
When you're talking
yeah.
in these strong uh, anti-Christian,
Sorry about that.
and I'm
John
done.
John 15, I believe it's John 15, 15 or 18 through 25. Jesus says, if they persecute you, it's because they hate me. They per uh, they will do that for my name's sake. That's what Jesus says. So, I've been thinking is more and more about this. I think we're not really living the Christian life unless we're being in some sense persecuted or mocked, or something like that. And when I'm in debate, or when I used to be in debates and things, um, Well, today, when an atheist or someone mocks me, I, I like to be humble and just say, let's just be humble about this. I wanted to ask y'all, especially you, well, both of you, what do you think about humility? Yeah, I think that's a good, that breaks the ice and it gets everybody to step back from their, wooden positions that don't move, John. Um, but if a person has humility or can step back a little, I feel that helps progress the conversation.
Absolutely. And like one thing that I found with conversations is, especially instead of putting onto the other person some sort of ignorance or idiocy onto them, taking kind of the humble or the low road and say, okay, maybe I'm misunderstanding here, or like I must be an idiot here because I'm not really getting it. Just instead of actually, yeah, because you're always going to be much more capable of accepting any uh, like disparaging comments that you might make about yourself. That it's better to do that rather than making it about the other person.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So humility is very, very much key, and I think having, especially humility and charity towards the other person, and like trying to actually understand them to the point that they would be able to agree with it, is also very important.
I think those are like so essential today. I mean, we cannot like do evangelism, um, if we don't bring those things to the table. Andrew, what do you think?
Yeah, I was just going to say that it's really helpful if you go through some self-reflection and know what your flaws are. And the other thing is you can very often compare yourself to the ideal and come up with the flaws. And if you do that and just sort of acknowledge that, that makes being humble a lot easier. Another technique that Epictetus, who was a Stoic philosopher, used is he said, when you're ridiculed or mocked, first look at what they're saying, right? So if, I'm being mocked for being short, because I am short for a guy, is it true that I'm short? Well, yes. Then why are you upset about something that's true? Okay, and then the other side is, well, they're saying something false. Well, if they're saying something false, then you don't have to really worry about it. And this is sort of the thing that you have to do is you have to have that going in, that you are comparing yourself to perfection as opposed to how you wish to be seen by other people. And that's a real key part, and you guys are exactly right. The other key part is trying to understand the other person. And, part of it is, at least on Twitter or dealing with strangers, is that they're often very belligerent. But that actually comes out even more obviously if you engage them with some amount of humility and charity. And the thing in public spaces is you have to alert people that people engaging in bad behavior, be it blasphemy or even impoliteness or things contrary to the faith or damaging the faith of others, are doing wrong, and that it's entirely appropriate for us to call them out and say that you're doing wrong and harming people's faith and doing evil. And that you can still do this in humility and charity, and yeah, that would be sort of my take on it.
Yeah, it's kind of like bringing them along. I mean, I always look back to Genesis. We are our brother's keeper, and like it or not, our atheist friends, they're our brothers and sisters in a way, and they're created by God. They're in the same image of God. Uh, we may have different beliefs, and their beliefs are wrong, But we can still put up a helping hand. We don't want to just leave them where they are. I'm reminded of what N.T. Wright has said. And N.T. Wright, he's been a wonderful, an incredible influence on my life, especially Andrew, since we're both Anglicans. N.T. Wright, he was, well, Andrew, let me ask you this. Was he the Bishop of Canterbury?
I don't think he was archbishop, but he was a bishop.
Okay. Okay. He said, God loves us as we are, but he doesn't want us to. But God doesn't want us to stay in the place where we are. Like he wants to spiritually transform us. Um, so, yeah, that pushes me so much. Um, yeah, that's the way I like to look at it.
Yeah, definitely, and that's sort of the key thing, and that's sort of the thing that we have to balance is that as Christians we have to, in some sense, accept the world as it is and love it. And consider it worthy of salvation, but we also have to take action to bring that about and to will the good of the other for the other's sake. And this is where prudence and wisdom comes in, because a one person might be able to handle a very mild correction, while another person needs to be sort of shaken out of their stupor so that they sort of realize that they're on the wrong path. And then we end up with these second order effects, or what example are they setting for others, and are they leading others down a bad path, etc., etc.
Yeah. I always go back to history because I used to teach history, um, and I feel like the atheists, perhaps because they've been influenced by by a wood, or have a wooden literal understanding of Christianity almost, uh, that they don't believe that history can be messy, but we know it can be messy. Um, and live life can be messy also. I think I forgot where I was going, Andrew. But yeah,
Well,
so I
there
think I
are
remember. I think I remember.
often. I think I know where you're going about
Okay.
what we're being taught, what kids are being taught in school about history, about religion. No wonder they're thinking these things. You know, did you catch, any of that stuff with Tim O'Neill, the atheist who goes against the mythicists, the Jesus
No,
mythicists? Talks
I did.
about he talks about how bad a history that these, you know, strong atheists have, believing that the church has held back science and we would have been living by now. We would have been in the age of the Jetsons, without if there hadn't been Christianity, and especially, they'll point out the Roman Catholic Church and the false controversies and the false between science and religion. That's basically all made up.
Hmm.
Go ahead, Andrew.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Basically, we're dealing with a weird sort of descendant from the cult of reason, or these other weird movements from the Enlightenment that have sort of reappeared in secularism and Marxism, and they're sort of these pieces of Christianity that have been shattered from the whole of it and don't have God or Christ with them, and sort of are distorted aspects of the Christian culture. And part of it is my own habit is I'm really good at analyzing things, and breaking them down and discussing them and pontificating, and that's sort of what we're good at in the West, is being very talkative about these things, and that's sort of the gut, or the thing that we try to do, or at least people like me try to do, because intellectual stuff is the easy stuff for me. um, and yeah, I think you're exactly right that these things are actually like myths, and actually form this sort of religion substitute of science versus the church or other things like that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It seems like when Dylan, or watching Twitter, watching how you or Max, or even me, my small account, how we deal with people is, I often see this caricature of what Christianity actually is, and I believe um, Alistair McGrath recently, on Riley's show. I forget the name of it. Um,
Unbelievable.
yes, yes. He talked about that. There's a lot of these secular myths that have been pointed out by Tim O'Neill, but not just Tim O'Neill. I like to delve into the works by David Livingston, or Rodney Stark, um, Ronald Numbers. There's so many. I have a whole library devoted to that, Christianity and culture and how it's shaped. It's almost as if the secular crowd is attacking um, fundamentalism, a wooden literal sola scriptura understanding of scripture, or maybe one facet of the Christian faith, and not looking at the whole panoply of what it means to be Christian, Christianity. Just one more thing, Andrew. When we were talking with Dr. Graham Oppie, I brought up this analogy, and I think William Lane Craig used it first. Um, I brought this up to Dr. Oppie about how we should understand Christianity as a cumulative case, like a piece of a knight's chainmail, with the links supporting the other links and the other pieces of evidence. He really liked that, but I don't think um, the atheist on Twitter or YouTube, or that level of atheist has really got to that level of sophistication to the ones we've debated before.
Yeah, and I'll just answer that, and then we have a question in the chat. Basically, uh, the typical Twitter atheist or internet atheist seems to be sort of like a religious layman, in that they don't fully understand anything, but they go and watch a YouTube video every week where there's like a sermon, and they get some bits of that, and they might be able to repeat those things, but not go very much further than that. And I guess personally I find it really frustrating, because I was a very philosophically serious agnostic for about 4 or 5 years when I was a young man. And when I try to talk to some of these people about the same issues that I was struggling with as a young man, they just like dismiss them as unimportant questions of like, what does it mean to lead a good life, or what is the purpose of life, or what is purpose, or what is meaning, and those types of things. And it's really surprising to me, because that was such a big part of my own journey as a young man. So, Fabulous Agnostic asks, do you all think it's even worth it, given the mind-numbing atheists will never move on their position? They always go back to burden of proof. Um, yeah, and I think that the thing to do with those folks is just to point out that it's a procedural trick that they're attempting to use to claim that this is like a formal debate, and that you have a burden of proof, and that they don't make a claim but you do, and that by using a procedural trick they're actually implicitly acknowledging that they have such a weaker position than you do, that they actually have to basically kind of cheat or have a handicap to even have a fair debate. Uh, so that so that's how I'd answer that.
Yeah, just one more thing. That understanding of atheism as the belief without, that I'm an atheist because I lack belief in God, that's a relatively new understanding of atheism. The traditional understanding of atheism is the belief that gods or God does not exist and therefore requires justification. So it is a procedural trick. Are y'all still there?
Yep. Yeah.
Oh, I thought you had cut out.
Yeah, it is a procedural trick. Sorry about that.
John,
Yeah,
would
they
you
like-
like to add anything?
Well, yeah, I definitely agree. It's kind of like rules for me, but not for. Oh wait, rules for thee, but not for me. That they take on. But it's funny because like whenever they might say some other positive claims, such as "there's no evidence for God," or something like that, which is a claim about the nature of the evidence that's out there, that they won't defend that position at all. I think I'm getting some echo on your side, Susan.
Really?
Yeah, we're getting some echo. If you could please mute when you're not speaking.
Okay.
But yeah, John, I completely agree with you. It seems that they try to dodge any burden or take on any positional claim and just want to stand on the fence and throw attacks towards the theist or the Christian theist in particular. And it, in live life, in real life, you can't sit on the fence in anything. You have to make a decision. That's the point that Eve was making when she was talking about William James in his critique of Clifford. You have to make a decision. It goes, it goes back to Kierkegaard also. Yeah, very good point.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of William James and also of Kierkegaard, though I've only written one of it or read one of his works. So, but at least so far from what I've read, I quite enjoyed his work so far.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. Kierkegaard is a bit of a personal hero for me. And you're exactly right. And well, the funny thing is if you go to Matt Dillahunty has this analogy about the pinball game and how you can there's a game where you have to guess the number of pinball or of gumballs, right, in this gumball machine. And he talks about how, well, atheism is like saying I lack a belief that there are even or odd number of gumballs in the machine. But the little sleight of hand there, and my friend Christopher Lansdowne, who does Missing the Mark on YouTube, which you should check out, by the way, talks about how basically he's solving the problem by not engaging in the game, because to engage in the game you have to write down a number, and that number has to be even or odd. But since he doubts it, he doesn't even play the game. And some games you can withdraw from that way, but other games you're sort of forced on, and if you refuse to play, you'll just end up losing. And this is sort of the William James idea of a forced option, where sometimes you have to make a choice, and it's like, well, what are you going to orient your life towards? Well, I'm just going to not orient it towards anything and have a disoriented life. I mean, that's technically an option, but it's not a good one. It means that you're spinning in circles.
Yeah, yeah, you have to make a choice, and I like to parallel it when it comes to a life decision, a major life decision, like which way, how do you make that decision? Do you make it on pure reason alone? No, no. You look at precedent and history, and you may even talk to your parents or somebody that you respect. See, if you're doing that, then you're arguing in a historical tradition, something like very similar to what Jordan Peterson or an Edmund Burke or a Thomas Reed would defend. It's not the case that we just make a random choice based on pure reason.
Yeah, absolutely. There's like kind of the human condition is the fact that we're going to be forced into positions where we have to make decisions without having all the facts or the knowledge about the situation, and then having to live with those decisions after the fact. But and yeah, it's not something that you can just like brush aside or put up to other people to have to make your decisions for you. I mean, you can, I guess, but that just makes them their that just makes them the arbiters for how you act in the world.
Yeah, and that's a decision too, right?
Yeah, that's true.
and this is sort of the thing, and this is one of the complexities of like faith, right? Is that I know some people who basically came to Christianity through philosophical argument, and they discovered, that ontology, the only reasonable ontologies, the only coherent ones that actually offered explanations were the theistic ones. And then from there, they sort of realized, oh, if this is the case, Christianity is true. And then from that point, they got led back into the faith and the practices and stuff like that. And I'm sort of on the other end of the spectrum that I was, in my existential crisis, like Kierkegaard, and like Kierkegaard sort of recommended, is you sort of have to jump onto faith and hold on tight, and then from there you go someplace new, and it's sort of exhilarating. And there's analogies he uses about being over 10,000 feet of water and taking a step out onto the water, where you don't know what's going to happen. And then for me, what happened after that is my mind started to get formed by the church and by these ancient understandings, and sort of buoyed up my intellect to sort of match this grave option that I had made, or this grave choice, or this momentous choice that I had made.
Yeah, absolutely. I often feel that it's that the atheist refuses to make a choice because they want to be certain. They have this false notion of certainty. But life is not about certainty. But they'll keep from making a choice in the hope that they can meet this utopian vision of certainty. An attempt to avoid false positives, to not be wrong, and therefore to even deny that you can even make a choice. Even deny that we have free will. So the extremes that the atheist finds themselves in, based on this unlivable, unnatural understanding of choice, it's untenable. Nobody, unless they had a preconceived warrant for atheism, would believe that, would adhere to these simplistic arguments for atheism or against Christianity. It seems to me, when you, and this is why I'm a Christian, when you step back and when you take the humble position, you look at like like I said before, we don't do things on mere reason or pure reason, as Kant delineated. We do things on, historical precedent. We take other things into account. I'm not a Kantian. I don't, adhere to all of his the things that he did, but Kant, Kant, excuse me, and Edmund Burke and Thomas Reed, and there's a reason why why we should look to the past and not just do things based on a whim, because either you're successful or you're not successful, going back to Dillahunty. So yeah, I'm a Christian because of the cumulative, because of the overall case, and that there's no reason to be skeptical of Christianity.
And this might tie back into this, but I wanted to bring up something from earlier. Like, I'm not completely like predisposed to thinking that arguing with people on Twitter is just utterly fruitless, because I do think that people do have the capacity to change their minds, but I think that it's only a capacity that, like, they have to voluntarily do so in a sort of way, and in order to allow that to happen, you have to kind of put a hand out there for people to accept it and then go through with it. And I think the only reasons that people will likely do so are, well, it's very much tied to who they are in their own life, and like where they're at. Like, if they're in a stable environment, they have no existential dread or anything like that. It's going to be kind of unlikely or hard to get them to consider, like, they've already invested so much into a certain amount of belief systems that they've had. It's hard to get them to get out of that unless those beliefs that they've already put a lot of investment into, what is the term, survivorship bias, or actually no, I think there's a certain fallacy of, like, the sunken cost fallacy. That's it. People are going to first stick with what's already been proven useful for them for so long so far. And I think that the only way to really get to people through in a way to, like, kind of change their perspective on things is by first I think the primary thing that motivates changes in beliefs is or at least for some people at least, it is the character of the person that holds these other beliefs in you. So, like, if most of the people that you interact with are kind of a-holes and that share in your types of beliefs, and you, like, don't enjoy being around them, and then you come across these other people that are really genuine and nice and friendly towards you, but yet they hold, like, very different types of beliefs. I think there's sort of a sociological aspect to our belief systems that we wish to share in the properties of the people that we kind of find admirable, and we wish to kind of do things similar to how they do things. And especially if it's been shown to us that these beliefs are effective for them in what they're able to attain and do good in the world and do good with their lives and things like that. I think I went too far off from where you were originally going, though.
Well,
so sorry about that.
I just want to say I totally agree. That's why I think we should look for building friendships and
Right.
relationships. And I don't think it you might have an atheist or a reductionist or a scientific materialist say, that's, it reduces down to that. We are we don't use our reasoning faculties, but we accept things on the basis of
Inference and also like
our subconscious. But
right.
I would deny that, but I would not deny that plays a factor. It certainly does, and I certainly agree with you. That's all I had to say for that.
Yeah.
Andrew or anybody?
Yeah, I guess the key thing that we have to keep in mind is that the human reason, in sort of the classical sense that the ancient church and the Stoics and people thought of, is very different than the sort of ratio calculus or rationality that Descartes or Kant has, and that it included things like experience and things like the emotional state and your character and things like that. And that's how we make decisions, is this sort of gestalt or this unity of different aspects of us, not just our ability to use logic, but our understanding of emotions and understanding of values and character as well. And
right. There's a sorry. I was just gonna say there's a quote from Blaise Pascal that's something like, "The heart has reasons that reason cannot know," something like that. So I think, but if you're attempting to argue with somebody purely on the basis of reason, you're going to be talking on a very limited kind of scope, and especially since certainly there are areas where our human reason is able to change, like our actions and how we do things. Like I do believe in free will. It's still going to be it's still like pitting one aspect up against a much broader. There's this analogy that Jonathan Haidt uses of the elephant and the rider, where kind of the rider, or no, the elephant is basically like your unconscious or your sociological needs, or your, I don't know, your needs as an organism, and all these other aspects built into you as an embodied being. And then there's the rider, which is kind of the person sitting up on top that is able to like make calculations and about certain things. But when the situation where the rider is being presented with a conclusion that is actually goes against something that the elephant like yearns after, or is basically goes against your own intuition or reasoning, or non-articulate reasonings, then the writer is just going to have to like come up with a quick and fast explanation that works well enough to serve that need of retaining that belief that the elephant is looking for.
Yeah, I've often thought about that. Jonathan Haidt's analogy of the elephant and the rider. I don't know for certain, but I don't think Jonathan Haidt. Now, let me ask you this, John: is Jonathan Haidt taken into account for the elephant history and historical precedent?
Oh yeah, I'd say so for sure. Like,
okay,
there's
just biology.
Right, you're right. There's like a lot of things like there's unconscious kind of things that we pick up from people. So like if I'm interacting with somebody in a actual real life conversation, there might be a raising of the eyebrows or an eye twitch or something like that my conscious experience might not notice, or something like that, and maybe I'll react to that. Like sometimes, like if you say something in conversation and the other person kind of like furrows their brow or something like that, that's almost like a signal to you, and it may not even be a signal that you like consciously are aware of, but it's still something that you still respond to, and like, okay, I got to explain this a little bit further in a way that maybe they'll be able to understand.
Yeah, but I don't know if that's the level, the extent of the elephant, because I think the Christian can not just look at the immediate circumstances that influence our subconscious, but also church history and thousands of years of church history and cultural innovations and theological revolutions and innovations that have changed history, moral principles that have moral things in the past, historical events, what I think Jonathan Haidt is arguing is something called sentimentalism, which would be analogous to David Hume. Okay,
Right.
because he brings up David Hume a lot, but David Hume had a contemporary, Thomas Reid, that argued ferociously against the mere sentimentalism of the elephant, or of the immediate circumstances. So what I'm picturing here is when you have something called reason that takes into account all these things in our subconscious as well, but it takes also things in our history, in our cultural innovations, all down through church history. I don't think Jonathan Haidt's David Hume's sentimentalism solves the problem. I would be more of a proponent of Thomas Reid on this.
So let's see if I can thread the needle on this a little bit. Part of the issue, and Jonathan Haidt probably articulates this a little bit, but I'm more familiar with Kahneman in System 1 and System 2, is the elephant part of our mind, so to speak, can actually be trained and changed by the writer and the elephant itself. So the elephant itself is not merely sentimentalism, but it's also the habits that we've formed of how we make decisions. And there is actually even some evidence that skills or abilities of the writer, which is our conscious, cognitive, step-by-step sort of discursive reasoning, can actually be embedded into the elephant if through practice and habit. This is one of the great mistakes of the Enlightenment, is assuming that the sort of symbolic logic type things that we can do are in some sense superior to those types of habits that we can develop, where the opposite is the case, is to really be logical and rational in the fullest sense of being like a flourishing human, or like Socrates. We actually need everything sort of like Thomas Reid says, and I think you're exactly right, John, that we have to keep in mind that the integration of the sort of elephant and rider parts of our consciousness is an ideal, and most people, including us, especially us, use the elephant most of the time, and the writer and the beliefs we articulate and the reasons we articulate oftentimes are like post hoc, or they're telling a story to try to explain it to someone else.
Right. And I want to at least point out that I tend to agree with, at least from what I've heard of Thomas Reid, that David Hume's kind of skepticism towards everything is far too much to actually utilize in day-to-day life. Like, I think there's this quote, this comic from Existential Comics, where David Hume is like the world's worst detective ever because he denies causation between the bullet leaving the gun and killing the victim of the crime, because like David Hume's skepticism is kind of so universal that anything that you would want to deny is capable of being denied simply because it does not fulfill his serious, like, empirical standards for holding things, and like pretty much anything could be denied based on his basis of skepticism. I think the point, though, there, at least if, like, say the goal is to change hearts and minds more towards Christ, then given that like people have a voluntary aspect to what they will believe. So if you're trying to like force somebody into a belief based off of like reason and evidence and logic and things like that, the human, like, using David Hume's kind of level of skepticism for any belief that they don't want to actually accept, they're capable of doing so. And sure, it puts them into the bind of not being able to live a different lifestyle that is between what they fail to believe or choose not to believe or do not accept on a rational basis, and how they actually live in their normal day-to-day life. Like, I think you bring up how Thomas Reid says that David Hume is like riding a hobby horse, that if he were to bring it into town, everyone would just automatically point out how ridiculous he's being. But the point being that, like, if you're trying to change somebody's mind, you're not going to be able to, at least it's unlikely that you're going to be able to do so speaking purely to the writer, because their elephant will be able to, and it's not even just their elephant, it's their writer as well. Like, oh, you're telling me I'm going to have to like change my entire lifestyle from a conscious person that's controlling of like what I take in and understand. I'm going to reinterpret kind of everything you're saying in such a way that I don't actually have to accept it, in a kind of David Humean skeptic approach, something like that.
Well, one thing I often bring up is, and I shouldn't do that, but I've said this, and I've said hobby horse atheism as describing the atheist. Just going on off the back of what Thomas Reed had said. Now, if Jonathan Haidt's viewpoint is to say that the elephant includes all of historical precedent, so it's not just me today that's deciding to do something, or it's not us living here in the U.S. or whatever deciding to do something, but it's 2,000 years of us, or person that was 100 years ago, and then 500, then 1,500, then 2,000. We've been influenced beyond belief. So the skeptic it's really not livable. And even David Hume, and this I even brought up to Dr. Ock, we're talking. David Hume, in his own study, doesn't even believe this. Doesn't even would not even doubt causation. If that's Jonathan Haidt's viewpoint, if he takes it to its logical extreme and takes all of history, church history together, then he would be more on the side of an Edmund Burke and Thomas Reed.
Probably. He's an evolutionary kind of psychologist, so he definitely takes into, like, he recognizes that the kind of unconscious or the broader parts of us as a human being and our rational cognitive decision making is derived from us, our singular lives that we're living. It's also built up out of the many of our ancestors and how their attempts to have succeeded and failed in the past.
Up one more thing, Kierkegaard, and I want to go back to Kierkegaard because I had a class on Kierkegaard. Kierkegaard said Jesus is we're simultaneous with him, with a simultaneity with Jesus, by walking in faith. I haven't had that class in a while, but I think through our historical precedent, it's not like we're going back just 2,000 years ago and looking at history, but we, there's a living tradition. There's a living apostolic tradition since the first century that has influenced us and that continues to influence us. So we are kind of contemporaneous, or I'm trying to think of the word, contemporaneous with Jesus. There's a type of simultaneity. Anyway, Andrew, do you have anything?
Yeah, this has been a great conversation. We're basically at the top of the hour, so it's a good time for us to share our final thoughts. And that's sort of one of the frustrations I have with modern skeptics compared to the Pyrrhonians and the ancient skeptics is they were skeptical of everything and very consistently, and they were as skeptical as themselves as they were others, and the irony, of course, is that they tended to be the friends of religion and theism, although a little mildly anti-clerical. And I guess that's sort of the thing is Humean skepticism is sort of like a nuclear weapon. It's so skeptical and generally applicable, it can be applied to everything. And those types of skepticism aren't really useful for anything except maybe washing away all the false beliefs and hopefully giving a chance to reconstruct new ones.
Yeah.
Right. And that's kind of like why I'm more of a pragmatist rather than a skeptic, because even with skepticism, like, and like not being able to have any form of knowledge or anything at all, you still have the kind of that aspect of faith that you have to walk out onto something. And like you can't walk out onto your inability to know anything. That doesn't get you anywhere. So you have at least the things that have been tried and true, and then you can kind of work with that. And then when things don't actually end up working towards your intended goal, then that gives you an indication that you either put it into practice incorrectly, or that the belief itself is flawed towards that goal, or insufficient towards that goal would be a better term.
Yeah. Like the Pyrrhonian skeptics, it's simply for the atheist that says skepticism is a virtue. We could just point him back to the Pyrrhonian skeptics and say, well, if you're going to go that route, then you're going to be skeptical of your own skepticism, which seems absurd. It's almost, when you carry out to the logical extreme, that Humean type skepticism against causation, there it goes. I mean, you could know nothing in that case. So I do take more the Thomas Reid, the Edmund Burke, the William James type philosophy. One more thing. The Pyrrhonian skepticism and the human David Hume skepticism, Thomas Reid, who we've been discussing, he said that was hobby horse, or it's like a hobby horse skepticism, or what I like to say, a hobby horse atheism. And I think that's very synonymous with the level of skepticism that the modern atheism brings toward our way is almost like a Peter Pan theology. I think it's that it could be characterized as a Peter Pan theology. It's just a caricature made out of thin air. Anyway, I'm done. Thank you, guys.
Awesome. Thank you very much. I don't have anything else to add. Thanks everyone for chatting today, and God bless.
God bless you.
God bless.